I'm 37 years old right now, and my sobriety date is November 1st of 2012. So this last November 1st, I celebrated 10 years sober by the grace of God. Yeah, wow, it's just crazy. And I'm just going to be totally honest about my story and just share with you what really happened and just all the memories and the crazy stuff. And I'd like to take you to a moment in time in my story. And it was out on Highway 29 in my hometown. And it was 2011. I was 26 years old. And I was on the edge of the highway. It was about 5 in the morning. And I'd been walking all night, just walking through the city. That's what I used to do when I was drunk. When I was on drugs, I would just walk the city. Just thinking, listening to music. And I'd reached the edge of the highway. It's about 5 in the morning. And I was in a hoodie. It was fall. It was cold. And I started climbing the fence to get onto the highway. And I climbed over the fence and walked out onto the highway with an intent to kill myself. It's a very busy highway. I walked out onto that highway, and I remember it just like it was yesterday. Cold air blowing in my face, tears in my eyes, completely intent on ending my life early. And I remember there were no cars for a second, and then a car started heading toward me. And I remember as the car got closer and closer, I locked eyes with the guy who was driving it. And that was my rock bottom moment, just for y'all to understand, was suicide, because my life had been completely unmanageable, drugs and alcohol. I had given up, and I was going to kill myself on the highway. That was my bottom point. And at that moment, the driver and I locked eyes. And I saw him. He's a bald guy, glasses, looked terrified, clutching the wheel. And a few months before that, I had overdosed on drugs, been taken to the ICU, and been told by doctors that they didn't know if I would make it through the night. A few weeks after that, I was arrested and placed against my will into a mental hospital. And I was taken before a judge, and my own dad testified against me in court to say I was a danger to myself and society. And here's the thing, y'all. He was right. He was right. A kid walking on the highway is a danger to himself and society. So I was locked in a mental hospital for an indefinite period at that point. And that was in 2011 and early 2012. So from a drug overdose to a mental hospital, and then after that, a final suicide attempt. Well, let's rewind to the beginning of the story. Joyous childhood, for the most part. Grew up in central Wisconsin. Cheese, football, and beer, right? And that was culture, Polish, German culture, lots of drinking. I got my first shot of alcohol when I was like 12. Dr. McGillicuddy's at Christmas Eve. Got to get the kids started, and I loved it. I was excited. I was excited by alcohol. And I thought, I found something special here with alcohol, even from a very young age. 15, 16 years old, I felt like, wow, this is exciting. This is different. But if you go back further in my story, I remember growing up. I was very young, maybe 4 or 5 years old. And I remember something bad happening. Something bad in a sexual way. Something bad happened. I'm not going to go any further with that to trigger any of you, but there you go. I remember early on, even in second and third grade, it was weird. I was always very emotional, an emotional kid. Worrying all the time, afraid. And my dad was a GED teacher. My mom was a nurse. We lived out in the woods, grew up with a younger sister, loved to read and write, played basketball, played soccer, football, got fairly good grades, but it was weird. I would randomly break down crying at school. And I would just uncontrollably cry at school. And it was awful. And I couldn't explain to people why I was crying. So you know what I did? I faked that I was having migraines. And then they would send me home. But I remember this happened a lot. I'd be on the bus on my way to school, trying to stop myself from crying because I didn't want to be embarrassed in front of my friends. And I just would fight so hard to keep those tears from coming. I didn't know what they were, but they would come out. I remember one time I was trying to hide from my friends. I stuck my head in my backpack to hide the tears. But people didn't understand really mental health back then. This is like the early 90s, you know. It wasn't a big theme yet in society. So they were like, what's wrong with you? What's physically wrong with you, right? So I said, my head hurts, you know, and you just make it up because you don't know what else to do, right? And I remember riding the bus and just being filled with emotions. I couldn't control my emotions. I remember before school started, we would run around the playground, right? Right before the school would start. You know, your school early with your bus, you'd play in the playground. And I would try to act myself into enjoying the playground, but as I would be running around trying to enjoy myself, I would start crying and lose control again. So I would fake headaches and they would send me home. And my parents and my grandma and my aunt and my uncle were on to me. They're like, there's nothing wrong with you. You need to go back to school. And I'm like, there is something wrong. I can't describe it, you know? So I don't know where that all came from, but there was a lot of fear. I don't know if you can relate to this, but the idea of being afraid all the time. Afraid of school, afraid of people, afraid of homework, stressed, anxious. That fear was so overpowering day in and day out, just this quiet desperation. The big book talks about people who live lives of quiet desperation. That was me. And even as a kid, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, a life of quiet desperation where you're just afraid. You're trying to kind of hold everything together and make it work in your life. It's not working though, right? You know, you're trying to hold it together and stuff's like popping out like that's not right. Something's not right here. But I had many friends and I did well in sports, but I feared sports. I played basketball. My dad was intent on me being a sports superstar, you know, basketball superstar. And I was good at basketball. But he would make me go to these camps, overnight camps, traveling team, and it was all just filled with fear. Like I was just afraid, you know. And Dad would say, I got you signed up for another basketball camp, champ. And I'd say, Dad, I don't want to go. And he's like, well, you have to go. And he would force me, you know. I said, Dad, I don't want to do this. And he said, no, you have to, and you're going to do it. And so I did, and I lived with fear, just being afraid of these basketball camps for weeks ahead of time, just every day being afraid, counting up to the day it would happen. And it was just always, I was afraid, I was scared. What was I afraid of? People, I don't know. What might happen, what might not happen. But during this time, I was about 12, 13 years old. My parents were fighting more and more. And I was raised Catholic. My mom always taught me to pray. But I was losing my faith in God even at this point. You know, the public school was telling me about science and technology. And I just decided I didn't believe in God anymore. I refused to be confirmed at the Catholic Church, actually. My mom was so mad because she made me go through the CCD all these years, every Wednesday CCD for like, what was it, you know, all those years from kindergarten all the way to senior. And I just said, no, I'm not doing it. I don't believe it. I don't believe it's true. And she was so mad. You'd think she would disown me over that. It was scary. But I said, no, I'm not doing it. I don't believe it. I'm an atheist. But during that time, I started to fear my dad more and more. His behavior was becoming strange over that time. And my parents were yelling and fighting in the hallway, and Mom would come into my bedroom crying, and I'd put my arm around her and try to comfort her. But like, I'm just a kid. I don't know how to comfort my mom. I don't know how to make my mom feel okay in this situation and tell her what to do, you know? I don't know. I'm a kid. So it was crazy, and I would just turn up my music really loud when my parents would be fighting. I don't know if anyone's done that before. Crank up Korn and Limp Bizkit and, you know, this music that we listened to in the 90s, you know. Crank it up and try to drown out the noise of them fighting. I was about 16 by then, and the parents were beginning to move toward divorce. And right around then, I discovered alcohol. And to drink, I had a friend, and we'd go to her house and hang out, and her dad had a bar, and we'd break into the bar and, you know, pour some out and replace it with water. I think we've all done that before. And we would drink. And I found, like, wow, I'm not afraid when I'm on the stuff, you know? I'm drinking, I feel okay for a while. But it started to get out of control right away. Where certain people would have a few drinks and then stop, me, I would go and go and go and go. It seemed like right from the beginning there was just very little control. Then the doctors started prescribing medications that I enjoyed as well. Thought, hey, another source. So I found some prescription pills that were making me feel good. And almost immediately, I went from a huge loser at school to being hated and bullied by everyone. I was now the coolest person in school. I kid you not. Once I was on stuff and I was the rebel, man, I was popular suddenly. And the girls liked me. I was popular with all the groups. And I thought, wow, I found my solution. I found alcohol, I found drugs, and it's working. And then it's like that car, and we're cruising along, and it starts to get a little out of control, you know, and you think, uh-oh, something's wrong. Something's wrong with my solution. Whoa. So what happened? I couldn't control it. And the school police officer came and got me out of class because I was really messed up and acting the fool. Brought me to a room, he searched me, and they brought an ambulance to the school because they thought I had overdosed. And my mom was there with the principal, and my mom's crying, and the two principals are there dealing with her, and they're bringing me over to the ambulance, and so I took off running, and I ran out of the school, and the police officer's chasing me, and I run all the way down almost to the fence to just get out of there. But the police officer got me before I could get there. They put me in the back of the ambulance, and they took me to a mental hospital. And I found my new home for many years to come, mental hospitals and rehabs. But my first time mental hospital, there I am. I'm stuck there for about 10 days. And I find out from there that I've been expelled from high school because apparently while I was drunk and on these pills, I had threatened to blow up the school. Oops. Yeah, that's alcoholism and addiction there. And so I was expelled. All my friends would not talk to me anymore because they were afraid I was really going to blow up the school, shoot up the school. And I found myself alone, expelled, no friends, and in a mental hospital. And that was a big turning point for me in my life. And that's when I kind of decided internally, I had tried to live a good life to a certain extent. And at that point I said, I am no longer going to try to live a good life. I'm going to do whatever I want, and I'm going to self-destruct. I'm going to destroy myself now. So from there, things went out of control further. I was hanging pretty soon with a group of bad boys and vagabonds in the school. I was going to be a rebel. I was going to do everything my way. I was done being the good, nice kid, the sports player, the academic. I was going to do what I wanted. And I was about 19 years old then. Ran into more alcohol, weed. Started hanging with a group of kids who were all from divorced families, and by then I was from a divorced family as well. And we all would drink, do drugs, play Xbox, hang out, stuff like that. I remember that early time of addiction and alcoholism being kind of happy-go-lucky. Like not too bad yet, kind of fun, you know. But pretty soon, just like my mom kept telling me, I got into trouble. And about a year later, when I was 20, I got my first DUI, and I got marijuana charges, and got a disorderly conduct as well. And I remember I was pulled over driving, and I was drunk on vodka, and I was driving my vehicle without lights on at night, only with the emergency lights on. At night, drunk, blackout drunk. And when the police officer pulled me over, I was threatening to kill his children. That's how I got when I was drunk. Threatening to kill his kids, and that's in the police report. I'm just going to be totally real with you guys. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. That's how I was. Piece of garbage, you know? That's how I am when I'm drunk. Vicious. Hateful. I'm going to say the worst thing I can to try to hurt you. That's how I was. Whew. I was not a smooth criminal, by the way. You know, if you have no lights on at night and your emergency lights on, you're going to get pulled over. Genius. You know, that's how that works. So, my mom kept yelling at me, saying, "You're going to get caught. You're going to get caught. You're going to get caught." I got caught, and I ended up on probation for that for 1 year. I made it 6 months into probation. Then I got more charges. And I was revoked from my probation, and I ended up in jail for 30 days. And that was awful. I'd always been so afraid of jail. Like that was the worst thing. I was so scared of jail. And I ended up there. I'd say with alcoholism, all my worst dreams always came true with alcoholism. Like if there was a worse thing, like something I feared, it would come and be with me in the alcoholism, you know. I would eventually find my worst fear in the alcoholism. I would. I remember being in jail and being in solitary confinement for 2 weeks, just suicide risk, and I don't know, it changes you, right? It kind of changes you, where you don't think the same ever again. It's wild. So I was in there for 30 days. And then I got out again, and I was back to it. I didn't care. I went back to it. And then a year later, I got more charges. And this time, another DUI. And I had been hanging out with this girl. We got drunk. We were popping pills. And then these other girls called me to hang out, so I drove, and I almost ran someone over. And the police pulled me over, took me to jail. There you go, second DUI. So things are just going down so fast. It's a downward spiral. And I knew something was wrong at that point. You know something's off. Like I'm not drinking like normal people, right? Something's not right here. Why do I keep drinking? What's wrong with me? And I do remember one time my mom asked me when I was drunk, "What's wrong with you? Why don't you just stop?" I've heard that so many times. Why don't you just stop? What's wrong with you? And honestly, I answered her honestly. I said, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't get it. I don't know. What's wrong with it? I don't know. I think that's the most honest answer you can give. I don't know. There's something, I don't know. It's crazy. So I met a guy when I was 23 who would smoke me up a lot, and I thought this was great. His name was Mike, but this guy smoked me up many times, but he would smoke me up until I passed out. And that was kind of strange. Why do I pass out every time I smoke with him? And I didn't put it together right away, but later on I realized why. I don't need to tell you why. I'm sure you already realize why. That's why. And that's the kind of people you'll encounter in that world. People who will smoke you up until you pass out. So that happened. And I had to deal with that and those memories. So it's a dark thing in the alcoholism. Because you end up in places you never thought you'd be, doing things you never thought you would do. And it's scary. So, after all this, after the second DUI, I realized, finally in my life, I was 23, 24 years old, I realized something has to change. Something is not right here. And I went to my first treatment as a place called Ellie Phillips Libertas Center in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin. By the way, it was an awesome place. They went right from the 12 steps, which was amazing. And I really learned about addiction for the first time. I didn't know any of this stuff. I didn't know about alcoholism and how it worked. I didn't know that millions of people around the world deal with this kind of thing. I didn't know any of that. So I learned at that place, staying there a few weeks, I have this issue that a lot of other people have, and they found recovery in a program called Alcoholics Anonymous. I thought, wow, this is interesting. I didn't know any of this stuff before, and it was profound for me. I was like, wow, this is a change moment for me. And I even did an inventory when I was there, and it was just powerful. And I came out of there with some new information. and I started going to AA in my hometown. And for a while, it was good. This was back in 2008. And I stuck around AA for a decent while, about a year. And it was 2008. I started going to college. I lost over 100 pounds. I'd been super obese as a pothead, and I lost all that weight. I was in college at the UW in the dorms, staying clean, staying sober, going for walks every night. I got a job in the cafeteria. I even joined the intramural basketball team. I was doing good. I was developing a love for writing and just acoustic cafes and reading poetry and this fun stuff. So I was going to meetings at that point 3 times a week, and I was just going to meetings. Every week, 3 times a week. They had told me about the steps and working with a sponsor, but I didn't want to do that. And I'll tell you, back in 2008, I wish I had done that. I really, really wish I had worked through the steps with a sponsor. In that first run in AA, it was wonderful, but it lasted about 11 months. And I was doing good, but I was not listening to the part about working the steps, the 12 steps, doing an inventory, giving your life over to a higher power, making amends. I just refused. I said, I'm not doing that. I'm just going to come to the meetings and listen, and it'll be fine. And it is not fine. It can last like that for a while for me, but I remember put about 11 months together, and then some bad stuff happened in my life, and I kind of drifted away from meetings. I wasn't going to meetings anymore, and I went back. In 2009, I went back out. And from that point, I would try to get back to AA over the next few years, but I'd show up and I'd stay for a month, 3 or 4 months, 90 days, 60 days. It was like that every time, and just, I couldn't quite get back to it. I don't know if any of you have ever relapsed and you can't quite get back in. It's just a terrible feeling. But anyway, from 2009 then to 2012, was my final rock bottom. Like it was happy-go-lucky before then, crazy stuff, but you could kind of laugh it off. 2009 to 2012 was not happy-go-lucky. It was scary, and it got really low. I went back to that Ellie Phillips 7 times, and every time, I don't know if any of you have gone to rehab multiple times, but every time I would go back afraid and wondering, is this going to be the time that I stay sober? Or am I going to? And you're sitting there at the treatment center terrified, wondering, am I going to stay sober this time? Am I going to get it this time? And you're just scared because you know the power of the illness. And you're wondering, is it going to click this time? Gosh, that was scary. Because I know you understand this. In that final phase where you're nearing rock bottom, you sense a sort of doom in the backdrop of your life. I don't know if any of you can relate to what I'm saying right now. You sense like there's some impending calamity around you. It's almost this all-surrounding fear. And you just know something bad is coming. That was scary. So it almost felt like the apocalypse or the end of the world, but it was, it's the end of my personal world. It was, And you have this impending sense of calamity, of doom. It's like it's in the air around you. Seven rehabs, 5 different mental hospitals. I would stay sober while I was in the treatment center. Once I left, back to it. In those last 3 years, it was oblivion drinking. I'd get the 18-pack, drink till I passed out. 2011 was just a blur. I don't remember most of that year, just being messed up every single day. My body was becoming more and more weak, where I don't know if you remember, your body would ache. I don't know if any of you had that, where your whole body would ache as the alcohol was doing its damage. And when you drink, it would hurt. And honestly, there would be times I would drink, and I'd have to sleep the whole next day for my body to recover. That's how low I was getting. So like I said at the beginning, I ended up in the ICU. My mom was there crying, and the doctor came in and said, "We don't know if you're going to make it through the night." My body was collapsing. The doctor slammed the door as if my life didn't matter. That's the look on the doctor's face, was, it doesn't matter that you're about to die. It doesn't matter. Because you're a junkie and you're an alcoholic. And who cares? That was the look I got. Here's the thing, I probably deserved it. I don't know if anyone deserves that. Then I ended up before the judge, my dad in the witness seat testifying against me, saying, yes, my son is a danger to himself and to society. Hard to blame him. Locked in a mental hospital, I was there for 3 months. I relapsed again when I got out, and it got ugly. Every time I would drink, I would wet myself after passing out. But here's where things started to change. My grandpa, amazing guy, he had come over and he'd given me a Bible. And I'd been reading that Bible. I was carrying it with me. I remember when I was in jail, I'd sleep with the Bible on my chest. And during the night, it would fall and hit the floor. And the other guys in my cell block were like, hey, can you knock that off? I'm like, I'm scared. I'm clinging to the Bible. I'd sleep with it on my chest. I was so afraid. I was so scared, you guys. To be in that cell block was just terrifying for me. Sleep with the Bible on my chest. But then I got a copy of this movie called The Gospel of John, and I started watching this movie over and over and over and over and over again. I'm not a very good reader, but I can watch a movie. I watched this movie like 200 times. It was about the life of Jesus. And so, during this time in 2012, started getting into October and then November, and at that moment, like nothing crazy happened new, but I had reached rock bottom. You know, you're drinking every day, you're wetting yourself, you're smelly, you're fat, you're at the end of everything, rock bottom. Nothing crazy happened. It was just sort of a drizzly bottom. And I hit that bottom. My mom had been praying for me, my grandma had been praying for me, my grandpa had been praying for me, lots of people praying for me. I think that had something to do with this. It just came into my mind one night. I just went down on my knees over by the fireplace, smelly, wet with urine, a mess, broken body, broken mind, and I got on my knees and I cried out to Jesus Christ. That was the moment when my life changed. You know what the Lord said to me first thing? Justin, go back to AA. I said, no, not AA. Anything but that. No, that's the worst place. No, not AA. Lord, please. He said, go back to AA. I'm like, oh, I got to do what he says. Dang it. I started going to AA again. 2012, November 1st, I'm back in AA. And I was a mess, dude. Okay, get this. I come in my t-shirt and I would sit down in the meeting, and my body was removing so much toxin, my whole t-shirt would be wet by the end of the meeting. Every meeting for a few months there, my whole t-shirt would be wet with sweat. And the old-timers are looking over at me like, whoa, I thought I was bad, you know? You know, for months, it's just crazy. What? Soaked. But I kept coming, I kept showing up, I kept listening. And here's the craziest thing, you guys. The craziest thing, I'm sure all you remember this, is after being so hooked on the drink every day for all those years, you start showing up to AA, and one moment after about 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, you stop and you think to yourself, I haven't drank in 30 days. I haven't drank in a few weeks. I haven't drank in like 2 months. What? How did that happen? That was the miracle of AA for me. Because God had removed it without me even realizing it by showing up to meetings. There was nothing else in my entire life that would do that. Nothing. It didn't. If I went to a counselor, no. Went to a group, no. Went to anything else, no. There's nothing could stop that addiction. Nothing could stop the alcoholism, you guys. You know that. I don't have to tell you that. You know that. Nothing else worked. Nothing. I'd given up. I was to the point, nothing had worked so completely that I'd given up. And then I came to AA, and it just removed it. I'm like, what? And I just got to be so grateful for that. Whoa. I had given up. This works. Unlike anything else. I was sober. My shirt was soaked, but I was sober. So that when I got back, I knew I got to work the steps. So there was an old timer back in my hometown, always sat in the back. His name was old Randy O. Randy O had been sober at that time for 27 years, and he always talked about the steps, and he was mean. He was a mean old guy. Yeah, he was just mean guy. And I thought, that's what I need a mean guy. I need someone who's going to call me on my nonsense. So I walked up to Randy, and I said, Randy, would you be my sponsor? And I was so scared. I was like, Randy, would you be my sponsor? And I'm all, hi, And he looked at me, he's like, well, what are you willing to do? I said, anything. And I meant it, anything. He said, well, I want you to meet me at my place at 8 a.m. every day, Monday through Friday. And 3 hours a day, we're going to go through the big book, and we're going to listen to the Joe and Charlie tapes as a supplement as well. See, Randy's sponsor was sponsored by one of the original 100 who founded the group. Early on, the steps were worked very strictly, and there wasn't any, meeting once a week to read the book. You met with your sponsor every day. In fact, early on, when you took your first step, you did it in front of your home group, and your home group would then vote on how well you had surrendered in your first step. And they would vote on how well you did it. The fact that Randy recognized that I was a desperate case and that I would not survive if I didn't take serious action is a miracle in my life. I'm so glad Randy met with me daily because I was in a bad state. He met with me 5 times a week, 3 hours a day. It saved my life. Otherwise, I was done. Big deal. Randy was taking absolutely no nonsense from me. Early on in my recovery, I was still smoking cigarettes. I was still struggling with depression and so many issues. I was a mess. But slowly but surely, my life began to improve. It's amazing what sobriety can do for a train wreck life. My family, you guys, considered me dead. My sister and my mom told me about a time years later. They told me about a time they were in a Christian bookstore, and my sister just looked at my mom and said, Justin's already dead, isn't he? My mom said yes, and they just hugged and cried because Justin's already gone. He's still breathing, but he's gone. Yeah, straight up dead. And slowly but surely, those relationships began to reappear in my life. But this was a last-ditch, dear effort to somehow break the chains, somehow escape this disaster. This is a lost cause. It seemed impossible, but I fought through depression, through fear, through just wanting to give up. I just thought, I'm so far gone at this point, I don't want to have to do all the work to come back. I might as well just die. But God kept encouraging me, keep going, keep showing up. I was such a mess. But I knew God had brought me into recovery. I knew that. So I realized I wanted to join a church. And I recalled how Mom took me to a church that I really connected to about a year earlier, and I went there. It was pastored by a younger guy in his 30s. I remember the first time I walked in, I must have looked just like a mess, sweaty shirt, weird eyes, all crazy, sweaty, weird looking. And he looked at me like, what just walked into my church? And I was just like, I sat in the back and I listened, whatever. They were really nice to me, though. I'm really grateful for them. I remember the first time I went, the pastor talked to me after the service, and I must have been quite a sight because the look on his face was pretty interesting. But I kept showing up, and I started to learn something. My first year in AA, I went to 8 to 12 meetings a week. I would go Monday, twice Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, twice on Friday, Saturday night, and Sunday night. I was hitting tons of meetings, and I kept sharing. I kept talking about my journey. I remember when a major breakthrough happened. As my sponsor was taking me through the big book, I realized something, and I looked up at him, and I realized something very important, because there's something in AA with that all of us, I think, go through, and it's otherness. feel I'm a special case. I'm not a real alcoholic. I need something a little different. I need something a little more. I don't quite fit in. I think every alcoholic, I know always wrestle with that, feeling different, feeling other, and feeling like alcohol is not really my problem. Like there's something deeper in me that is the problem. And I realized as we were going through the big book, I looked up at Randy, and I said, you really understand how I feel. You really understand how I feel, don't you? Like you really get it. How I really am inside. And he looked at me and said, yes. Because the alcohol is not really the problem. It's something inside of us. So, wow, that's it. That's when I was in. That's when I was in AA. In that moment when I realized I'm not different. He gets me, and it's something I feel. Something that feels wrong in me. He understood exactly what I was going through. It wasn't really about alcohol. It was about the way I felt. You know, in the big book, it says the action of alcohol on chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, right? These allergic types can never use alcohol safely in any form. Randy told me early on that an alcoholic of my type in my body has an allergic reaction to alcohol. And once I start drinking, the craving is triggered, and my body insists on more. That is the first aspect of the disease, an allergic reaction of the body. That's why other people can safely drink 2 to 4 drinks and not go crazy and end up in jail. My body is different. My body reacts with craving for more. But there's a second aspect of the illness. It's that once I'm sober, I have an obsession of the mind that demands the need for more alcohol. The book says the persistence of this obsession is astonishing. Many follow it into the gates of hell and death, and it's true. I'd do anything to fulfill that need. Ruin my whole life. That insane twist of the mind that says, I need more. I need it. I have to have it. And that was the thing, you guys. That was the thing at the end. I came to rock bottom when I was so messed up, so ruined internally, that I would drink and my solution of alcohol would not work. I was so ruined inside that I would get drunk and it wouldn't work. That was what happened. I did not come into AA because I decided I wanted a better life. It was that the alcohol stopped working and I needed something else. It didn't work. I had so destroyed myself, even being drunk did not help. That is horrifying because alcohol had been my solution to everything. Any problem, drink. The doctor's opinion says that alcoholics are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks. Drinks which they see others taking with impunity, right? That was it. Irritable, discontented, disturbed without alcohol in my system. But that rock bottom was, it's not working anymore. The doctor's opinion, I think, was really huge for me in just understanding that it's an illness that is treatable, you know. It's an allergy and an obsession that is treatable with this solution. My human will had failed me. Normally that's how I deal with any problem, like self-control. I'm going to use my self-control to defeat the problem. With alcohol, self-control was like, there was nothing there. There was no ability to cap it, unlike other things in my life that I could cap with self-control. No self-control. And then the solution was AA. And this worked when nothing else did. But I can't just show up to meetings and expect to change. That's a huge part to show up to meetings, right? But I need to have what the book talks about is a psychic change, right? The psychic change that it talks about. To have a massive rearrangement of the way I think. So that I become a different person, really. And the 12 steps become my new way of living. My new pattern of existence. And any successful person in AA You can tell they are living practically by the 12 steps. If they have a problem, they put it on paper and they share it with their sponsor, 4 and 5. If they hurt someone, they 8 and 9, right? They identify who that person is and they make amends. They are enlarging their spiritual life with prayer and meditation. They are committing and recommitting their life to God, to their higher power in step 3. And when all else fails, they're going back to step 1 and admitting powerlessness and starting over, surrender, right? And when they get caught up in selfishness, they work step 12 and they go work with another alcoholic. When nothing else works, work with another alcoholic is the solution, right? You find someone to help. That's what Bill Wilson did when he was near relapse. He worked with someone else. And that becomes a practical way of life, those 12 steps. And that's what I need, is those 12 steps. I need that pattern of life because I don't know how to live without alcohol, literally. In place of the 12 steps was a big bottle of booze. Here's my steps, And in place of that, the steps have to become my way of life. Otherwise, I'm not going to make it. I can't survive on what's left without the alcohol. What's there? What's the plan without the alcohol? Die, right? There's nothing there. I think one of the hardest aspects of the program, though, is that belief in God, right? And in We Agnostic, it says, lack of power, that was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live. The whole issue of alcoholism is a lack of power, right? If I had the power internally to defeat the alcohol, I don't need AA, do I? But I have to have a power greater than that, greater than myself, which failed to deal with the alcohol problem, right? We couldn't find that power internally. It was interesting. It's not in here. We had to look outside ourselves to a power greater than ourselves. It says many of us were once violently anti-religious. Page 46 says that we found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than human power, we could commence to get results. So if we could step back and lay aside some of our old ideas, our old prejudices about spirituality, we could then make a beginning and begin to see results. And the book says a man asked himself this question on page 56. Who are you to say there is no God? And that helped him to come to realize that God did indeed exist and was willing to carry him through recovery. Step 3, I think, is the biggest of all the steps. For me, that was the big step. To be able to turn my will and my life over to the care of God. Wow. That is a big deal when you really think about it. It's really saying I'm going to now check my decisions with my higher power. I am now going to live differently. When I make a big decision, I'm going to pray about it and talk to my sponsor before I make a decision. Right? I'm going to live on a different footing, a spiritual footing. And that was huge for me. It says, first of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. Next, we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, this is from page 62, God was going to be our director. He is the principal, we are his agents. He is the father and we are his children. Most good ideas are simple. And this concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which we pass to freedom. And step 3 says this, God, I offer myself to thee to build with me and do with me as you will. Relieve me of the bondage of self that I may better do your will. Right? What a simple prayer. What a simple request. God, I'm giving it over to you. Relieve me of the bondage of myself so I can do your will in life. Step 4 was huge for me. My sponsor said, I'll give you 3 weeks to work on your step 4. And I was obsessed with my own story, I think, kind of self-interested. I wrote like 67 pages of stuff. 67. I remember I brought the big stack of papers to my sponsor, and my sponsor said, all right, you ready? I said, yeah, I got 67 pages. He said, you got what? But he was a good sponsor. He looked so mad, but he calmed himself down and he's like, okay. You know what he did with me? He sat with me for 8 hours. And I was not done. The next day in the morning, we sat for another 4 hours. What a good sponsor. 12 hours of this guy jabbering about his past. Wow. Thank you, Randy. What a great guy. Sat with me for 12 hours. Can you imagine how boring that would have been? Thank you, Lord. So he walked me through all these steps. And it was it's incredible. I worked step 8 and 9. Going to my mom, going to my dad, looking him in the eye and saying, I'm sorry. Making amends to them, making amends to my grandparents, making amends to my sister, making amends even to my grandpa who had already died. And I went to his grave and I made amends. Just apologized to him. And I paid my mom back money that I'd stolen from her over the years. I did odd jobs for my dad, for my mom, to make amends, to make things right. And the Lord even had me, volunteering at places and doing community service to make amends to even my city, and just to say, I'm sorry that I wasn't there for the people in the city, And that was huge, because I don't know if you can relate. In early recovery, it's hard to look people in the eye. It's hard because you feel ashamed of what you've done. And after I worked those 9-step amends, you guys, I could look people in the eye again. Yeah. Because I'd made amends. That's huge. So otherwise, you're always ashamed. No, I was so ashamed. Once I made those amends, it was a big deal. So I had given my life to the Lord, going to church, going to AA, working the steps with my sponsor. And pretty soon, my life is changing. My life's becoming different. I'm becoming close with my parents, becoming friends with my sister again. Being able to work a job. You guys, I didn't work a job for how many years there? Don't even know. Terrible. I started working at a homeless shelter. Just working with people a lot like I used to be. Not willing to hear directions or solutions. And I started getting involved with the Salvation Army and going to their church and going to their conferences and getting plugged in. I started going to college, studying theology. And I worked at that homeless shelter. I just handed out Bibles to people, praying with people. I'd pile everyone in the Salvation Army van and drive them over to the AA meeting, AA club. It was fun. I don't know if they got anything out of it, but I did. So it was good. It was so wonderful. Just walking through that process, and pretty soon I just felt called to be in the Salvation Army. And I went to the UP for 2 years to do an internship in the Salvation Army there. And I always went to AA meetings when I was there. And I was in Chicago then. I started going to seminary in Chicago. And for 2 years I was going to AA meetings in Chicago. Staying in the program, working the steps, sticking with it. And then in 2019, I graduated from seminary as a Salvation Army officer. And my first assignment was I was placed to be in charge of the Salvation Army in Owasso. That was 3 years ago. And scariest thing in my life, coming here to Owasso, because I didn't know anyone. Didn't know a single person, About 7 years sober, starting to be able to think clearly by 7 years later, not sweating as bad, but still, scared in a lot of ways. How can I lead people? How can I manage a staff? How can I? But I kept going to AA in Owasso, found meetings, kept showing up, kept working with people. And it's amazing because God has gotten me through all of this so far. Because God is really real. He brought me to AA. This is where I belong. It's my place. It's not an accident. It's not an accident that the 12 steps came from the Oxford groups, which was a Christian movement. And God is here in AA. I really believe that. And even when I gave my life to Christ and became a Christian, he said, Justin, go back to AA. I'm at work there, God says. I'm like, wow. It's the right place to be for people of the alcoholic variety. But the conclusion of AA, I believe so strongly, is found in Jesus Christ, the Savior who loves us. God sobers us up in AA But the big book says be quick to realize where religious people are right. The solution to alcohol is AA. The solution to sin and brokenness is Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. If I can get this stuff and work through it, find recovery, find salvation, anyone can. That's a thing. Anyone can get this. You don't have to be special. Anybody can receive this and find this. I'm not special. I'm just another alcoholic who's found recovery and salvation. It's here for you too. Praise God. That's all I got.